Hello and welcome. I'm Anand Naidoo filling in for Riz Khan. More than 1,400 Iraqi asylum seekers in the United Kingdom are being told to leave or face destitution and deportation. Britain recently tried to forcibly repatriate about 40 of those Iraqis, but after landing in Baghdad, the Iraqi government sent around 30 of them back. This latest incident highlights the increasingly precarious position of Iraqi refugees in Europe. Earlier this summer, Iraqi asylum seekers in Copenhagen were forcibly removed from a church and placed in detention. According to human rights groups, Greece routinely rounds up Iraqi refugees and then secretly pushes them across the border into neighboring countries. Sweden, which had been the most generous country towards asylum seekers, is now beginning to deport its Iraqi refugees. For these Iraqis, the majority of which come from minority groups, they say going back to Iraq is a certain death sentence. On today's show, we ask, is it safe for Iraqi refugees to go home? And if not, who should be sheltering them? Remember, you can join our conversation with your questions and comments. Of course, you can also call us. We also welcome your texts and emails on this show. Joining me now to discuss this from Newton, Massachusetts, Kirk Johnson, the founder and director of the LIST Project to Resettle Iraqi Allies, a non-profit group promoting the idea that the US government has an obligation to resettle Iraqis. And from London, Caroline Slocok. She is the chief executive of the Refugee and Migrant Justice Organization, which works with asylum seekers and other migrants in the UK who seek protection under the law. Welcome to both of you.
Good to be here.
Caroline Slocok, let me start with you. Let's look at the case of these Iraqi refugees in the United Kingdom. A group was forcibly sent to Iraq. The Iraqis accepted some of them and sent most of them back. Is there confusion about the status of these refugees, or is there confusion about who they are?
Well, we still haven't got a clear picture as to precisely what's happened, but what we do know is that this all happened quite suddenly. The UK government hasn't removed Iraqis to central and southern Iraq. And we've heard through the Iraqi immigration minister that there had been discussions going on about the agreement that they have on removals, which hadn't been finished. And there was a working group looking at making sure that people had the right papers, and then that hadn't finished its work. And it's possible that the Iraqi government just felt that the government was jumping the gun. But the immigration minister had also warned the UK government that there shouldn't be removals, forcible removals to Iraq before the elections next year, and that would be potentially destabilising at this point. So that may be why the Iraqi authorities sent 30 Iraqis back. It was certainly a very embarrassing event for the UK government, and we hope that it will cause it to have second thoughts before it tries to do this again.
And what do we know about the fate of those who have returned to the United Kingdom?
Well, they were first of all put into a detention centre near to the airport, and we believe that they have now been dispersed to different detention centres across the UK, and we're trying to talk to them to try and make sure that they get proper legal representation, because we represented one client who was to go on the flight and managed to get that stopped through a court injunction. There were 5 others who were prevented through court injunctions from going on the flight, and we think the law can be used to prevent the government from doing this, partly because it did it in a very secret way. It didn't reveal the destination precisely of the flight, so it wasn't clear whether it was going to Baghdad, and they didn't tell us at what time the flight was going to go, and a High Court judge ruled that was against the law, and that they should have done, but nonetheless they pressed ahead with the flight and obviously came to grief.
Let's go to Kirk Johnson in Newton, Massachusetts. Kirk, what is the situation as far as the United States is concerned? How many Iraqis have been resettled here?
Well, the numbers are climbing, but in my estimation, they're not high enough yet. You know, 2 or 3 years ago, when I started out on this issue, there were months where only one Iraqi refugee, one human being, was admitted to the U.S. We're now at a pace of between 15 and 20,000 Iraqis being admitted to the U.S. every year, which puts it in a leading position. But my particular focus is on the Iraqis who have become imperiled because they worked for the United States in Iraq, and on that score, I don't think we've hit our mark yet.
Yeah, and that also goes to the question of the moral obligation that countries like the United States and Britain have in accepting some of these refugees. We did receive a number of emails about this particular point. I've got one here from Linda Taylor, who is from Michigan in the United States, and she says, well, of course, it's the Americans that should take in Iraqis that have become refugees because of their actions, and presumably she refers to the actions that the United States took in Iraq. Have you detected that there's been a change in policy, or in practice for that matter, from the previous administration to the current one?
I think there has been a change in that there are people in government right now, and we have a president of the United States who has explicitly spoken about America's moral obligation to help not only those Iraqis who have helped us, but others that have fled as a consequence of the war. The new administration came in without a lot of the baggage that the outgoing administration had on this issue. We've seen a number of, frankly, stellar appointments in terms of the people within our own government that look at this issue, but we haven't yet seen an articulated plan or policy yet. And I'm increasingly concerned about this moving forward, because as our military footprint shrinks in Iraq over the coming year, as we have now initiated our withdrawal, so will our capacity to provide help to these Iraqis that are living in bases alongside of us and helping us out.
Carolyn Slocok, there are some governments, in particular the British government, which believes that Iraq is no longer a conflict zone. Therefore, these asylum seekers have no case.
Well, clearly it feels that it's safe to return to Baghdad and central and southern Iraq, yet it's been warned by the UN High Commission on Refugees that it is not safe to do so, that it is still volatile. And actually, they've recently lost a case which we took against the UK government, which suggested that it hadn't been offering sufficient protection to Iraqis and people from other countries who've been fleeing generalised violence. The shocking truth is that the UK, like the US, I guess, has taken relatively few Iraqis, despite the leading role that both countries have played in that conflict. And there are hundreds of thousands in neighbouring countries, particularly Syria, where if the UK starts removing Iraqis, saying that the country is safe, then those refugees too may start to be under pressure to return to their country, and that can have a very destabilising effect. So I think it's important that the UK and hopefully the US exercises some real leadership in this situation, because Iraq can't afford to be in a situation where it's flooded by refugees when it's not safe for them to return.
We did get one particular email about that. This was Jihad writing to us from the United Kingdom, Jihad Makdisi, and he wrote, who else would provide a better shelter than Syria? And as you've just pointed out, Syria is accommodating a large number of Iraqi refugees. Carolyn, do we know where these refugees come from in Iraq? Is it one particular region, or are they from all over the country?
They're coming from different parts of the country, and to the UK they're coming really in surprisingly small numbers, and the reasons for which they've come may vary, but some of them certainly have worked for the coalition forces, and have found their lives put particularly at risk. A few years ago, the government was forced, due to public pressure in this country, to do more to help interpreters who had worked for the UK forces, and a number of those have come over. I can give you an example of the sort of Iraqi that's come to this country. One of our clients, who was a doctor, worked for the coalition forces and came to this country and found himself being arrested for document offences. He subsequently, due to our actions, got refugee status and is able to stay in this country. But that's not an untypical story.
Kirk Johnson, what about the cases of those Iraqis who have arrived in the United States, who are already here? We've heard reports of many of them having a lot of difficulty assimilating into the American way of life, and some of them actually having difficulty finding jobs. Very highly qualified people, doctors, scientists, translators, interpreters.
Yeah, and I have a lot of friends who are American-born with advanced degrees who are having a hard time finding jobs here as well. It's a pity in a sense in that a lot of these refugees are escaping from war zone into a country that's in our own sort of tough economic state right now. There are a lot of Iraqis that are coming in that are looking for work, and to be quite honest, the U.S. Refugee admissions and resettlement policy is frankly not well geared towards highly educated refugees wherever they're from. And so we have, in order to try to give a boost to the system, there are thousands of Americans who are helping out the LIST project, and they've formed chapters to sponsor and help the highly educated Iraqis that are coming in to try to help them find meaningful employment so that they're not going to, work in a kitchen somewhere or something. But frankly, a lot of them are, at least are telling me that they're happy to be out of harm's way, and after a few months, I think they kind of recalibrate and accept that they may have to take a job that's beneath their expertise level, but for the sake of their children and continued stability here in the U.S.
I think one of the particular problems that these reports pointed to was the fact that many of these very highly qualified Iraqis who arrive in the United States have problems getting the required certification to do what they qualified to do here in the United States. Has the federal government here in the United States addressed that in any way?
Well, any refugee, no matter where they come from, they're going to have to get certain recertifications. Any Iraqi that comes in has work authorization right away, but if you're a civil engineer, you still have to go through the recertification courses. Frankly, the funding for these kinds of programs and for refugee resettlement writ large is not where it should be. But I think the same could be said for a lot of government programs in the U.S. right now. And so our approach has always been to help the Iraqis get out of danger and get to a place of safety. That's goal number one, and goal number two has been to try to sort of throw our shoulders under this situation and give these Iraqis a boost once they get here, knowing that it's never going to be a perfect government-run program. It's going to be a lot of Americans coming together to help refugees, and we actually have a pretty long history of helping refugees settle here. They need their attention focused on the Iraqi cohort coming in.
Okay, we have to take a short break right now. More of our discussion in a moment. We'll be right back.